Okay, well, folks, this is Jay Frost speaking to you, of course, from the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by DonorSearch. So if you've been here before, you've heard this spiel before, but I hope you'll stick around because the real meat of this will be in our conversation today with these two fine folks I'm going to introduce to you momentarily, but I want you to be a part of it. So if you will, please look at the bottom of your screen and you can find two things that I'd love you to use. One will be the participants area, the chat, which is where you can talk amongst yourselves, but also you can right now let us know that you're here. So if you wouldn't mind just going ahead and saying hi, we would love that. It would be really a big help. So look for the chat, if you will, and just say howdy. We'd love to know that you're here, maybe where you're from, what's an institution, whatever you'd like to say. And if thoughts occur to you throughout, please use it. So go Army, okay. Good to see you too. So please use that. And of course, our panelists may be using that as well during the session today. We also have something else at the bottom of the screen, which is, of course, Q&A. You know what that stands for. If you have questions that are more formal in nature, I hope you'll go ahead and store those there. So that way, if the chat gets fast and furious, we won't miss your questions. We can make sure that they are answered in the course of the conversation. So with that, I want to get underway and, of course, introduce our panelists on this subject. You know why you're here. And if you saw my tweet a few minutes ago, you know that this is apt because I've been in a blur myself for the last week. So here are two people who can help us find the focus. And of course, they are, as you can see on your screen, Michael Felberbaum and Chris Cannon. You may know these two gents, but if you don't, Michael is, of course, working as Director of Advancement Services at Yale University. He has also been practicing and teaching mindfulness for a number of years and is the co-founder of Causativity. So that's something that we'll make sure to include in the links so you can learn all about that afterwards. I know you know where to find Yale University, but you may not know where to find that. Also, we have Chris Cannon, our friend of many years in this field. Probably all of you know him by reputation in one of his many roles throughout the industry, and I could list them all, but I won't do that. What I will do is instead direct you to look at the Zuri Group, the area where now he is the President of Strategic Services and guiding us in so many ways as our institutions need to find, well, for lack of a better word, and appropriately today, focus in doing their work much better. Previously, he is the author, of course, of another book on a related subject, and that's something I'll be asking about in a moment. That's fundraising operations. But today, of course, the focus is on focused fundraising, the subject of a book that these two gentlemen have just written and is being released. So maybe we'll start right there. And if you don't mind, I may just direct this question to you, Chris. Tell us about focused fundraising. Is that, first of all, is it out?
Sure. Hey, thanks, Jay. And pleasure to see you. Nice of you to say nice things about Michael and I, but of course you've been an industry stalwart for even longer than I have. So I greatly value all of the leadership and insight you've been providing to everybody here. The book will be out in August. We think that Michael and I are going to see it and touch it on about August 2nd. I think on Amazon it'll be released later in August, and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and all of those other sites will have that. It's through Wiley, which was the publisher of my 2011 book, which has been a nice partnership with them. They're a good group of humans, and really made the process easy. And what really made the process easy, honestly, was partnering with Michael. The quick backstory for Michael and me is that we worked together on a project at Yale, and we really enjoyed each other's sort of thinking and company and time. And so we endeavored to establish a standing Friday call, Friday mornings, 8 a.m. my time. And it worked every once in a while, but life gets busy and the urgent overwhelms the important. And as much as we wanted to talk, we canceled way more than we talked. And it was kind of irksome. And so there was a point at which we both said, what do we do? Like, how do we make enough time to focus on this conversation we enjoy? Right. And that was the kernel of this entire effort. And so what you'll learn about Michael in one sec is he's the mindfulness part of focus, and I'm the operational efficiency part of focus. And our sort of yin and yang around this, I'm Captain Unfocused, right? I've got 87,000 unread emails in my inbox. Michael does not. He's much more zen about things. But we both brought to this equation a different way to look at the same problem and came up, we think, with a bunch of great solutions that we put into focused fundraising. So Michael, I feel free, and Jay, I don't want to drive the bus here, but feel free to dive in there about, the early days generation of focused fundraising as an idea that then became a book.
Please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Jay, for having us today. It's exciting to be part of this conversation. It is like such an issue for our times, isn't it? Just being able to stay focused and miss all the distractions. And I started practicing mindfulness meditation like well over a decade ago, and it wasn't so mainstream. But part of helping to bring it to staff at Yale, and then over the last several years, I've been doing workshops and like seminars at Yale for staff on different topics related to focus and mindfulness. And as Chris and I have continued our conversations over the year, which is kind of like, what can we do to bring these ideas, bake these ideas, talk to more people, do some interviews, and try to offer something that's valuable, that combines the kind of operational orientation that both of us have with the latest understanding of mindfulness and kind of how our brains are dealing with large volumes of information. And as we were talking about right before we hopped on here, 10 hours a day of screen time, so how are we all kind of dealing with that?
Right. I know every time I get an alert on my iPhone saying how much more time I spent this week than last week, I'm terrified. And if you feel like putting in the chat how many hours you spend a day, feel free if you want to embarrass yourself. Although that might be actually a helpful statistic for the conversation. But I love definitions. And so maybe, Michael, could you define mindfulness? I know that might seem elementary to you, but it's something that people talk about. And it's one of those things that isn't really often defined very well.
It's a great question. Depending on who you ask, you'll get a different definition. If you talk on the kind of like Buddhist side of things, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's like one of the very well-known, spiritual kind of teachers, talks about mindfulness as the energy of being 100% there, is the way he defines it. And then if you take somebody from a more scientific perspective, like John Kabat-Zinn or Ellen Langer, then they might define mindfulness as simply paying attention to what is happening without adding or embellishing. So there's a lot of different ways to define it depending on the tradition and the orientation. For the sake of what we wrote and the way we kind of worked with mindfulness, we were more on the side of the simply noticing what is happening as it is happening, being present to what is happening as it's happening.
Yeah, I as you were saying that, I thought of a phrase we've used here, even in our house, about one way of thinking about some of this as emptying your mind, but that doesn't necessarily mean then focusing on the thing in front of you. So it's very interesting that if you can free your mind of all these other things, that you can focus. It's not always necessarily the intention of some descriptions of meditation. But Chris, you talked about this from this operational perspective where everything's moving faster and faster and faster, right? So were you attracted to this already, or is this something you already practice, or did you see this as a way of actually doing more with less time? What was your, where did this come from?
I really am not I'm not very well equipped for mindfulness from just a high level of energy, but low level of focus in my work. So I am the person that has probably 70 or 80 tabs open on Google. I certainly have 100 emails open right now, with the intention of getting back to everyone. Good luck. And so I use operational efficiency to corral myself, given my tendencies, right? So what I've always liked about Michael is I'm like, well, I admire that he's really calm and cool and collected and organized. We talk about this in the book that I have colleagues that are zero inbox people, and I am not one. However, I do use email rules to make sure that I don't miss important things. I use business rules to move emails out that I never really even look at, because if they really need me, they'll text me. If they really, really need me, they'll call my cell phone. If they don't have my cell phone, I'm not sure I really need them to be in touch with me, right? And that's a hard way to put it, but one of the things that we focus on throughout the book is the ability to say no without it being a personal thing. And there's a whole notion in improv around this idea of saying yes and. Yes, that's a great idea. And can you give to me a 2-pager on what that looks like? If you ask for something after someone asks you for something, the odds that you won't get that something to then have to go do it go up. And so you can avoid,
Okay.
working on something that you don't even want to say no to because of the relationship, et cetera. Or maybe it turns into a great idea, but you just don't know. And so rather than spend time and energy on it, I built a mountain's worth of little tips and tricks. And it goes to, organizational governance, making sure that you stay in a channel. And if you want something outside of the channel, you need to be purposeful about getting out of the channel to go look at that thing. That's why policy and procedure manuals being documented are so important. So from a fundraising operations standpoint, as dull as documentation can be, it's your key to helping you focus, because you can point and say, this paragraph says we do it this way. You're asking for an exception. We handle exceptions in the following ways. Do you still want to pursue that? And often you'll be allowed to go back to that more efficient, routinized way. So things like automation, things like AI can actually take hold and be effective if you can operationalize them. And exceptions are often the death knell of being able to operationalize things. And so having policy that allows you to deal with an exception as opposed to change your policy and procedure due to that exception are another one of these drivers for me when I think about advancement, operations, and technology.
I don't want to take you off course, but I'm curious about the flexibility in that process. That if part of what's happening here is that being able to discern what's important and what's urgent, and differentiate. That it sounds like those policies and procedures are a way of governing some of that. That we can all look to it as sort of the source of truth. But how flexible is a document like that in this process, especially if what we're really trying to achieve is a more focused, mindful approach to whatever it is that we do?
Yeah. Let me say something real quick, and then I want to pass it over to Michael for an idea. But, think of prospecting policies, right? That having a principle giving policy that is almost purely exception based, but it is contained, is important, because you never know what a billionaire family may want to do with your organization, but you need to be nimble and responsive to that, and smart about it, right? Not have 5 different team members from 5 different departments engaging that family all at the same time. But in prospecting, one of the ways that I like to think of this, and we talk about this in the book, is it's more of a river than a lake, right? It's moving, and so it's always fluid in a way. And I think, Michael, that gets at some of the core notions of consciousness and mindfulness, that you're only present in that period of time for that 1 second, and that plays into how mindfulness could be brought to bear in thinking about, in this moment, the most important thing I should do is call that board member or fix this record because it's related to a multi-million-dollar gift or what have you. And when you start to think in those terms, where your highest priorities are also documented, you're right, it is flexible, but it's more flexible, like it's fluidly flexible, as opposed to saying, we're not even a river anymore, we're going to hop over to this pond, right? I think you do need to focus on these higher order principles in the advancement services space. And so, Michael, I know I'm throwing you for a loop here, but does that relate to the sort of river-based notions of mindfulness that I know I've heard in the past?
Well, I think what happens in practice is that, like, how I think there's a common expression that, it's not the plan, it's the planning that matters. It's all the prep work and stuff that went into the plan, but the plan itself, once you start going, it can get uprooted. I think it's very similar with a lot of policy, because to Chris's point, it forces those difficult values and trade-off discussions. I think it's less about codified policy than it is that there's an organizational commitment to have hard conversations and make trade-offs, and that's what enables focus, I think, because otherwise, like you're saying with prospecting, if everybody is, if it's kind of anything goes, and whether it's documented or not, but there's no trade-offs, there's no sense of guiding principles or values, then then what do you have to work with in terms of making focused decisions? So that's just kind of the way that I tend to look at that.
Yeah, and well, so if you don't mind drawing that out, so then what happens if you don't have those things? What does that look like?
Well, see, one of the things that we talk about and in discussions with people is like the kind of policy by exception, or angry donor policies, where you have situation where one person is upset about one thing, and then you end up saying, now we need to do X, Y, and Z as a result, so we can avoid this problem in the future. So I think what you get in environments in which there is not a commitment to having hard conversations about like the operational practices is that you see a lot of that. You see a lot of one-off exception-based situations. And Chris has a line that he likes to talk about. If your triple check is catching problems, and then the problem isn't that you need a better like another check or a double check, it's that you should be looking like a little bit deeper as to why this kind of thing is happening in the first place, and trace it all the way back to root cause. And so I don't know if you want to piggyback on that, Chris, but I think what happens in the absence of like good governance is a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the absence of governance would be chaos, right? In a way, meaning no rules, no procedures, etc. So from a focus perspective, having at least some rules of the game then allow people to know what's acceptable behavior, what's smart behavior, what they should ask to do first, etc. So very simple thing as a bullet in everyone's prospect management policy. And some of the folks on this call today and who are listening later when it's recorded, well, they won't have a policy, and that's a problem, right? So once you need to get a policy, once you have a policy, you have to follow it, and it doesn't have to be ironclad. You're going to have exceptions and some wiggle room within there, but you need to have a bullet that effectively says, go look at records in our database of record to make sure that someone else isn't already having a conversation. It's sort of common sense, but without rules, if your goal is to raise more money, you might do it, in spite of what other folks are doing, not maliciously, but certainly, not in an informed fashion. And we've probably all three seen this. I have an unfavorite case from way long ago, major university ACC shop, where one department asked for $50,000 2 weeks before the president of the university was going to visit with that family. And it just completely flummoxed the family. They were like, well, yeah, we just talked to Ed. So that little simple thing of not following an easy procedure that should have been in writing, probably was in this case, led to confusion, led to a bunch of wasted time, and again, a lack of focus, right? If you have to spend the amount of time, I refer to these as sort of $50 problems. Sometimes you have that gift receipt that somebody calls and they're upset about it, and the organization might spend across the board 20, 30, 40, 50 hours on a $50 problem. Wow. Because the process wasn't followed, because the folks weren't focused on these fundamentals of, okay, if we do it this way, then it's consistent, then it's measurable, then it's repeatable, then it's going to be automatable probably. And that will lead us to then having more time to think, more time to focus on the higher order outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, it sounds like this may be more than an angry donor problem. It may also be an angry CEO or board member problem. Any of those things, right? Especially 40 or 50 hours in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's scary.
The number of occasions where we find these sorts of anecdotal issues superseding the systemic issue can really be overwhelming for a group. So again, if you have really tight organizational procedures, you can say, yep, that was an error. And one of my favorite phrases in becoming a focused fundraising shop is to say, okay, we'll fix it, right? If you find a problem, fix it. If it's anecdotal, if it's human error, which will happen, of course, just fix it. If it's systemic, and this is a bit of what Michael was getting at, then let's actually, if you have a process where you have to triple check every, event list before it goes to the mail house, you have a different problem. You shouldn't need a triple check. A double check, maybe, but if you do a triple check, it means you don't trust the person doing the double check, right? So fix that part at least. And that, as simple as that can sound, getting those fundamentals right really then helps us deal with some of the fancier things. And that's where Michael and I find that we're running into a lot of what we call the tech tug, which is a lot of our organizations are looking for these really neat, new, cool, shiny things, and their addresses aren't necessarily good enough for mailings, right? Or the gift processing isn't good enough. And Jay, I know you've experienced this in your career.
Every day.
So that tech tug is not just the individual who has a phone, 10 feet from their face at all times, but it's the organization that says, hey, we need AI, we need it today. And their mail lists still have to be reviewed by 3 people before they go to the mail house, right? That there's a disconnect there that we want to try to help organizations suss out and resolve.
There are so many places to go there, but before we do, Michael, do you have any additional comments on all this?
Yeah, we keep going. I think this tech tug thing is something that's very, it's just key for Chris and I. Been talking a lot about.
Now, I know you were just writing an article about this too. Now, has that come out yet?
That'll be a little bit later. It's in the AFP Chronicle, AFP Journal, sorry. I think it comes out in October. But you submit these things a little bit before they get posted.
Yes.
That was one, Michael found one of the neat things about writing a book, and I encourage everybody listening to think about, what book would you write? That's actually a good focus exercise, right? It might not be in this profession. It might be about, tulips or something that's really interesting to you personally. But figuring, like, writing a book, putting an outline together, doing the research to me was really intriguing. So, Michael's great mindfulness background was intriguing to me. I'm a brain science nerd, if you will. Like, I love these social science books that come out that look at, studies that have been done from the 50s about, the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, for example, was actually a study done in the late 50s in Omaha, right, where they gave people a letter and said, hey, get this letter without mailing it, get it to Washington, D.C. And they found out in Omaha there was like about 2.5 connections to get it hand delivered to D.C. But it was also just to a couple of people in Omaha who just knew everybody in Omaha, right? Like the Warren Buffetts of that community. Now that's sort of a social science, exercise that learning from that and therefore trying to figure out relationship webs, really in, reading Gladwell's early work in chapter 5 of, I want to say Made to Stick, which is the wrong book.
I've got on my shelf and I'm not remembering either, but it's but what's amazing to me is that you remember it's chapter 5. Please go ahead.
It would be better if I remembered the book itself. But the whole idea around, like, why is 150 a good number of prospects? It's partly because it's really hard to remember 151 prospects plus Gladwell's book name. To boot. So your brain just gets crowded, right? And so a lot of there's some of the Kahneman books and this guy named Torkel Klingberg who wrote this book called The Overflowing Brain. Just fascinating stuff about, like, our cranium, our brain size, our skull size has not really changed in 40 or 50,000 years. But Michael, I don't know if you remember the number anymore, but we now, humans on average, tend to read 75 newspapers worth of content a day because of the tech tug and because all of this. It's the reason, Jay, you're in front of a screen for 10 hours a day.
Okay, so before we go too much further, let's just define tech tug.
Well, so we talk about the tech tug operating on kind of 2 different levels. On the individual level, which is the lure of devices, ever present in our pocket, in our bag, wherever they are, just kind of, and I kind of think of that as it's like always the bait, and then we get hooked by something as soon as we look at it. So your device is kind of drawing your attention all the time because in the back of your mind there's always something interesting, new, updated, something you can do, and then you get on there, and then there's however, you might have been intending to look at your phone to do one thing, but then you see 2 notifications and there's 3, and then from there it's all over. So the individual tech tug, and then the organizational tech tug is the way that the gravitational like force of new applications, new features or functionality, as though those are going to be the things that solve the problems that organizations face. And I think it's been, there's for those who are familiar with the with Gartner and with their research and with the hype cycle, this has been documented for years about the kind of predictable trajectory that technology projects take from the initial hype through the they have some very descriptive language. Yeah, from the peak of inflated expectations to the trough of disillusionment, onto the plateau of productivity. So Gartner had done all this research on technology adoption, but as the pace of change has increased, as there's more and more new feature sets out there, organizationally, there's this constant pull. Now, I love technology. Chris also, I mean, so this isn't about not wanting cool stuff. It's just about ordering the priorities and kind of harnessing the best of what's out there and not getting lost in kind of the hype and the like glamorizing of it.
Right.
And so that's kind of why we think about the tech tug both individually and organizationally.
Now, Chris, you just got back from Disney.
I did.
And this is cue the Disney example of this, but I'm sure you can then tie it to the rest of what we're talking about. So what was your, it was at Disney World, right?
Yeah, so Disney World, and what I thought was I just wanted to share, which was intriguing, is that the tech tug isn't all bad, right? So the tech tug, if anybody's been to Disney or a lot of shops, a lot of organizations these days, Major League Baseball and the like, they all have apps, right? They all want you to engage with those. They've all made it interesting, and they bling at you, and you get a little notification number. Ooh, what's that? Why does that have a red mark next to it? I need to go look at that sort of thing. Well, at Disney, if you've been to Disney lately, they have something called Genie Plus, and you can purchase a package, and then you can find ways to get on rides. And the neat thing about it is it helps you, save really hours and hours of time a day. But you will spend at least a couple of hours a day looking at your phone, refreshing. And there's actually these tactics that, well, if you don't go to the time you want to go on the Guardians of the Galaxy ride, which I highly recommend, it was amazingly cool.
Sounds fun.
Try again, scroll again, refresh. And I felt Pavlovian about it. By the end of this trip, we were only there 3 or 4 days. I just couldn't stop wanting to look and see, okay, what else could I go get? What could we do one more ride today? They close at 9 o'clock. Could I get something at 8:50, right? And it was neat because we got more out of it, but it was almost exhausting because it was never ending. And to Michael's point, you could scroll a little bit further, see some new information. You could, watch videos. It was engrossing, but engrossing in a way that, I was there with my kiddos, right? So I spent a little less time with them and more time with my nose in, does anybody put a note? I put a nose in a book. I don't know what you put in an iPhone anymore, but my eyeballs on the screen or something. And the one other thing I'd share, though, as a tip and a trick, I will routinely, when I travel, for personal reasons, I turn off the integration of my email and other things to my phone, right? So that I'm not encouraged to look at the hundreds of emails I'm about to get while being on vacation. Now, the interesting thing about that is I still found myself 2-3 times a day clicking my mail button on my phone down here and saying, oh, wait, no, turn it off. I'm working, or not working. I'm on vacation. I need to stop. So that's Pavlovian, right? I've conditioned myself to be, oh, what's going on? What's going on? And the focused fundraising mantra is really how to raise yourself out of that situation, right? How to recognize that you're in it to begin with and you can do something about it. I don't always, and I don't mind. I love what I do. I don't mind working really hard and a lot, but there are times when you got to turn your brain off or you need to go camping or do something. And so the tech tug can follow you along almost anywhere these days if you let it. And so a lot of what Michael and I have done with this book are present not just how your brain works, not just how mindfulness works, but how individually and then how organizationally one might go about improving, not eschewing the technology, but improving the technology use as a result.
This is interesting from so many perspectives, because on the one hand, I see all the connections you're making for our field, and I know we're going to talk more about the different models you have for then increasing that mindfulness and attention, and therefore productivity that's really useful productivity through focus. But at the same time, a lot of these examples you're providing are of it sounds like I'm making a moral judgment, but kind of the worst aspects of society. In other words, why does Facebook want to keep our attention all the time? It wants to sell us stuff. Why is it that, this may not be true of Disney because you're there already. They have your money. Maybe they want you to buy another drink, but for the most part, you're just going to ride the rides. But for all the social media sites, getting our attention gives them dollars. And the only way to do that is through a process which is quite similar to addiction, serotonin. So that's a little bit different, isn't it, from what we're discussing here? If the things that we might be attracted to utilizing in order to supposedly raise more money more effectively, if that's what most of us are trying to do, are they necessarily going to lend themselves towards being drawn into the river or into the lake or whatever the water analogy is, so that we're constantly looking for the different fish? Is it the same?
I think it's a great question and a great point to say, is applications, field-specific applications, industry-specific applications, are they similar in effect to, say, social media platforms? Or I would say it's less about, because I don't blame the technology or the technologists. I just think of this as just a fact of life, almost. Like the tech tug kind of is there in the background.
The tech tug it's Adam Smith's invisible hand, but using technology, right? Right. But go ahead, Michael.
But yeah, and so the way I kind of look at it is, let's take the example about less about the applications that we use and more about the communication methods. Because we talk in the book about what we call 4 M's: messages, media, management, and what am I missing, Chris? Messages, media, management, and
I'd be horrible at Jeopardy. I keep not
messages, media, management, and meetings. Okay, meetings. Okay, so and I can't believe I forgot that one. So is a virtual meeting, it's not Zoom's fault, it's not anybody's fault, but is a virtual meeting more distracting and have more of a tech tug than an offline meeting? I would argue yes.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but yes, but do tell us how.
Yeah, not because Zoom, I think, is up to no good in providing cool new features, like I can put on a party hat, and we can do a video waiting room, and you can do all kinds of innovative new things that they'll keep adding, but because it's just, I'm already on the screen, so I'm looking at a screen, so I'm looking at a 2D space versus looking at people in a room. There's other stuff that's available. I'm used to looking at a screen and doing other work. You can I'm sure we've all had the experience where we've been on a meeting that we kind of forgot like we were, because we drifted off into something else that was one of the 40 other tabs that we have open, like Chris was alluding to. So it's not that it's bad or that it's evil or somebody's up to no good. It's just that it's like an ever-present kind of force that's drawing our attention. And so just being more aware of it is part of being mindful.
Oh, Chris, we can't hear you.
Funny. There's some lesson there, right? But I would say that, to use prospecting and engagements as a fundraiser as an example of this, when you're at a lunch with a donor, would you ever, if your phone buzzed, would you ever take a look at it and see what it was?
Right. No.
I just did it right now on my phone, right? I have my cameras right here. I can go until right about there before you see that I'm looking at my
Right.
phone.
That's it. Session's over. Goodbye, everybody.
I
No.
know. Don't take it personally. I really did this perfect. But we can all do it. Michael
Right.
came up with this phrase, which I just love, which is we have tend as opposed to attend a whole lot of things these days
Oh,
because it's
yeah.
virtual. Now, multitasking isn't a culprit either, right? You can multitask and still be very impactful. It's when you multi-purpose and you start to drift off, right? So trying to write an email, type up an email while being present in a meeting virtually, very difficult to do, right? But if you feel the vision, if you're at a coffee shop and something caught your eye, it's not that much different than a text message coming up. It's when you read the text message and then you respond to it, and then you notice you have four others, and then 7 minutes have gone by, and someone calls you. The bane of everyone's existence in Zoom world these days is when someone calls your name and you haven't been paying enough attention. Hey, what was
It's
the
like
question?
elementary school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
What was
like,
the question again? Is basically saying, I was looking at my phone. Sorry about that. No one says it that way, but that's what they were doing, right? We
that's
all
right.
know. And so
Well,
in the end, go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I mean to cut you
Yeah.
off, Chris.
No.
I mean, we're conditioned in a way to compare our on-screen passive learning to watching Netflix. Like we may not intend to do that, but if you're in a meeting and you're looking at a screen and it's an hour long and you're passively receiving information and it's a PowerPoint that somebody's reading to you, like I think from a brain standpoint, it's like, how could I possibly pay attention to this? I'm used to watching things on screens that are much more interesting. And so I think that's what we're up against. So I don't, like, for me, it's not, I don't blame the technology or the technologists. I don't blame all of us who are just trying to, get through the day.
Right.
We're trying to just describe the situation as best as we can and give people some maybe novel tools and ideas for how to navigate it.
This is so interesting from another perspective too, and proof that I need more mindfulness and focused attention because I'm thinking about this. But the difference between, like you said earlier, Chris, nose in a book, and what are we really doing with technology is that our nose that's there. This isn't just a matter of proximity, physical proximity. It's how we engage with the information. You said we're in a meeting with a donor or anybody. We're on a date if you're in that part of your life. We're in or a date with a spouse if you're in that part of your life, or you're just hanging out with a friend. If we're doing it in person, the experience is different from doing it maybe virtually. Watching a film is different from reading a book. Not that one is better than the other. Like you're saying, Michael, it's not that we're saying Zoom is bad. We're saying Zoom is different. And so one is a highly intentional medium, right? Like we're delivering content. The other one is one where we are expected to participate. That third wall is broken, as they'd say in the theater. So this is very different kind of experience. And we've all been living this now for 2 years. So I have a couple questions embedded in here. And one is, if presuming we continue to live a little bit like this, which seems like it's here to stay, like it or not, then how do we make adjustments for the fact that it's sure there's tech tug in this, right? We have everything. I have actually a laptop and my phone here while we're doing this. That's really terrifying. I'm trying not to look at them. But we have that with this, but we also have the reality that some of us are going to have a real meeting with somebody soon. How do we make sure we can live both those experiences governed, as you said earlier, by something that really keeps this process grounded in reality?
Sure. And I have, Michael, why don't you jump in a minute with your notion of causativity, maybe some other ideas. But on the operational side, one thing that I think we all saw, which was fascinating, was we had shops. One that comes to mind, a university, where within a day of having to go virtual, so it was March 13th and the Black Friday or whatever. By the following Monday afternoon, I was talking to the CIO of this foundation, who was at an Office Max buying a printer for the last person on his team of 175 people that needed access remotely. So they were ready. They were already using Teams. They already had, and they were prepared. And there were other folks that, two or 3 months in, were still trying to figure out get processing and how these things were going to work. And so I would say that the hybrid model is certainly here to stay. Within reason, I think that full remote. My company is fully remote. We have a physical office, but we always have had 2 or 3 people in an office and 60, 70 people not. That what one of the ways to address this then organizationally is through culture. It's through onboarding that's really clear, really designed to encourage people to be open and honest, and recognize that hey, you need to probably have your camera on during certain meetings, not every meeting, but to not, after a while people wonder what you're doing, right? So you need to have really clear metrics that say, hey, Chris Cannon did a good job this month because his metric shows that he was in the 95th percentile of whatever the target was, whatever those things should be. So there are some ways I think that really great technology, to have good metrics, you have to have good data, you have to get reporting, you have to get policy around that. All those things organizationally start to tie into how, as a group, you can trust each other to do a great job, and so you don't care where people are at, right? So I've been a remote employee for 14 years now in this office for the most part, when I'm not traveling. And when John Murphy, our CEO, calls me, he doesn't ask me where I'm at. He doesn't care, and I don't care where he's at. It's we're focused on whatever that topic is, and then we move on. So I think there are ways to build a rapport and a trust and a framework around culture and metrics and so forth organizationally that will help with this, Jay. But I think Michael, with causativity, Michael, you can talk about whatever you like next, but I think your notions of causativity flip this on its head a bit and allow us to really embrace being this busy, that it's great to be this overwhelmed, as strange as that might sound.
Yeah, there's two places I want to go with this question, if I can, Jay, because this one, I want to go a little bit out there in terms of like future thinking and philosophical with it, and then the other maybe is more practical. But this question of like the way I interpret your question is we exist in more and more in digital spaces, and we have to kind of navigate between physical spaces and digital spaces. One of my intellectual heroes is this guy Jaron Lanier, who you may have read or heard of. I think he was at MIT in the 70s, 80s maybe, and was an early pioneer in virtual reality. And I've read a fair amount of his work and seen him talk, and he was part of architecting the promise of virtual reality. And now we're living some aspects of that. And then if you forecast ahead, if you want to read an interesting article on Pew Research, there's an article about the Metaverse and people's attitudes toward the Metaverse and what the landscape might look like in 2040 in terms of how people's days might look with a functioning Metaverse. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And how much time and how are we going to be operating in virtual or digital spaces versus in physical spaces? So I think we're just at the very beginning in many ways of, I think the pandemic accelerated a trend that was happening toward more and more, digital spaces, but it really made it possible to keep functioning at the level that we were pre-pandemic with using all the, the virtualization of the office. And so, I think we're just at the beginning of it. And because I practice and teach mindfulness, I would just put in a plug for some kind of practice, intentional grounding practice like meditation or something else, exercise, something that puts you back in a physical space and puts you back in a 3D world, because it's very easy for the world to become very flat and very two-dimensional when we're on screens all the time. So that's the more like bigger picture view. On a practical or personal level, with causativity, this project I've been working on that sprung up at Yale, it has a lot to do with questioning the basic units of work. Like, we've all been conditioned and grown up in a world in which the basic unit of work is a task. And what we're doing with causativity is we're starting to question, has work changed so much over the last however many years, and especially over the course of the pandemic, that we need to reevaluate some basic understanding of how especially thought-intensive work is conducted. And so we've put forward this idea of that the basic unit is, rather than the task, is the ask. Like, what is it that we are trying to do, less about the specific task. And that's a whole other conversation, and it's a longer conversation. But I think that what really gets me going about that is I do think that we are at a inflection point socially around how we work. Is work, it's so intangible for many of us, and it's in a completely digital space. So getting our minds around that and operating in that framework may really need some conceptual shifts that are now just in coming about.
There's so much to unpack in what both of you just said. But Chris, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, just real quick. I think the one, what would Karl Marx think about thought work, right? It made me think of that, Michael. But the task versus the ask, one just quick tip and trick that Michael's team has built out is, if you just put we all write a list of things we have to do, put a question mark at the end of each one of your tasks. It gives you license to say, really? Like, do I have to do that? And it's so interesting. You go from, having a list of things you feel like you have to do to, I'm going to ask myself, should I really do this thing? And that has helped me. Again, I'm not the best purveyor of mindfulness tactics, but that's helped me lately say, really, like, if I put a question mark at the end of it, then it's not something I have to do that has a lot of, impact on my thinking per se. It's, I'm going to say yes or no when I get around to it. And it's just a really interesting, quick, easy way to lessen the load a little bit, have your mental load go down, in my experience.
Yeah, and given the nature of our task lists, that's really, it's not just a helpful exercise. It must go back to the point of this whole thing, is bringing that focus, and it makes it about the purpose of things, not just the planning. All the planning is very important for all the reasons you said. It's not just the planning of things either. It's about the purpose, which it actually is how I was interpreting some of that idea about the ask, not the task, because the thing about task work is that it does give us a mechanism for figuring out, okay, if a person works 9 to 5 and we pay them so much per hour, then we know what's happening. Like, we expect them in a physical office space, they're going to sit at a desk and do something, or they're going to work at a factory and do something. It's a task-driven economy. And then we are willing to pay so much if we're the employer for that. We're willing to do the task if we feel we have the choice, in exchange for so much money. That's different from what you just said. You make out a list of things that are important. It sounds like we're going to agree that they're important, and then we're going to only do the things that are important and towards the purpose, which, to go back to philanthropy and fundraising, seems to be one of the conversations we're having too, underneath the surface of all this, which is, do we really need to send X number of email? Maybe it should be more, maybe it should be less. But what is it that we're trying to achieve? And the donors, they keep telling us that they want impact. If we're going to believe them, then that's that. There's another thing that occurred to me, because Chris, you've used this word several times. It really interested me, about trust. And trust is so important. We see that declining trust figure in all the different surveys. And what I wonder with this is some of what we're talking about today, some of what you're talking about in the book, also a way of ensuring that there's trust inside the office amongst one another, trust with the donors who might support what we do, whether we're operating virtually, whether it's Ready Player One or we're sitting down over a coffee table. Is some of this a way to maybe re-earn the trust that we seem to have lost?
I think so. And that's, that notion of culture at the organization level really gets at, if you believe that your colleagues are doing, what we've all agreed to, i.e. the governance and policy and procedures that we're all being measured in ways that are reasonable and visible and transparent through metrics. Then you have this nice story. I have the luxury with Missouri, man, every person I work with just knocks it out of the park all the time. So, I was gone on vacation, and it is not hard for me it's hard for me to leave work because I like it. It's not hard for me to leave work because I don't trust that my colleagues will, not a little flake or they won't get things done. I have every confidence in that group. And that trust, therefore, goes a long way to saying, I'm going to delegate, right? So one of the core challenges to focus is not delegating things that, again, delegating into a no to the circular file, we're not going to do it, or just delegating into a team member whose experience level and time would warrant that work, but you should be focused higher and higher and higher, right? So a lot of my thinking ultimately is that all this operational stuff is so that, the top fundraiser at your institution can talk to billionaires and board members. And if they can do that because your operations are focused and functioning and automated, fantastic. I think from Michael's perspective, it's a little more on the personal level, and that causativity is really where purpose intersects with productivity. So the question might be, you ask yourself should a lot more often in that setting, because it's an important question. Should I go to lunch with this person? Is it worth the institution's time based on the potential outcome? Not just, I need a visit today for my metrics to go up, right? If you're looking at just numbers without the impact of those numbers to the real bottom line, to the real outcomes, then you'll game your metrics all day long, but not really make a lot of progress, which would be a shame, right? Because all of our nonprofit organizations really deserve a well-oiled machine and team members that are, rowing in the same direction. I've got lots of cliches and metaphors to throw at that one, but Michael, what would you say?
Well, where my mind went with the question about trust, Jay, also has to do with management, and in this environment where if you were of the mindset that if I don't see you, you're not working, or if you're not physically present, you're not working, and having trust in a hybrid and remote environment. The reality that I see, and I see this with my team, is that people need help with turning off. It's actually the opposite of what most people believe. It's like, not that they're not working, it's that work has invaded every corner of their home and their life, and they're having trouble turning off. Like to Chris's point about, I don't work because I like what I do, and I think if and I like to work, and I think the work ethic and culture for lots of people in our American society is that they're hardworking and they want to do a good job, and because of the tech tug and because of other cultural factors, it's harder to stop working. And that's part of where we want to say, okay, let's explore a different kind of focus. Let's examine some of the basic constructs of work with this idea of causativity to say, we need to think about it differently so that you're getting the fulfillment of work and it's also manageable. And I think a lot of times people think, well, it either has to be unmanageable so it can be fulfilling, but you kind of can't have both. And I think if you create an environment where there's a lot of trust and you help people to turn off and do other things, then they do find a lot of fulfillment in the work, and it's not unmanageable.
I know as we're getting to the end, it probably would be helpful for people to know in a single breath why they should read the book, because I know you've been talking about it for this hour, but how they will come out of the experience as more focused fundraisers, people who are closer to spending their time appropriately on the things that really matter. Can you give us kind of a snapshot about what focused fundraising will do for them, but maybe more importantly for their whole institution? Because it seems like what you're talking about is a personal thing that we need to do, but it's also an institutional dilemma.
Sure. Yeah. And Michael, jump in here, but the individual and organizational tips and tricks in this book help you address the tech tug, this instant overload. We constantly feel this urge to overwork, as Michael just mentioned, in ways that are very tactical, that are very controllable. And so, for instance, you mentioned breath. One of the things I learned from Michael around mindfulness is that just controlling your breath, breathing a little bit every once in a while, is actually very centering, right? And so stopping yourself to take a breath, stopping yourself to what we call raise a situation, whereby you're going through a 5-step process to get to an evolutionary improvement in either your individual or organizational approach to things. For all those reasons, we think that this book is going to be instrumental for individuals, for managers, and for whole teams. We are very hopeful we're actually starting to have a few of these in group-wide kind of book club approaches with different organizations, because when everybody reads the same thing, it's like good governance. Everybody understands the same principles, and it helps the whole organization right their ship and get to a better spot. Michael, how would you more succinctly put it than I just blathered on about?
Well, I think what readers will be surprised about is that we put forward a different definition of, I know you said you like definitions, Jet. We put forward a different definition of focus. This isn't the standard idea about focus that you would get in lots of other books with the standard recommendations of the things that we've all heard a million times before. We're talking about a kind of focus that is unforced and is more based on purpose. And so it requires people to go a little deeper, but I think if people read it with that mindset, they can get a lot out of it. And that's been, our experience so far.
It's a great way of summarizing both of you. Thank you so much. Again, how can people get a copy of the book? Where it'll be available everywhere? Sure. It's through Wiley, right? So
Wiley.com, Amazon, just search Focus Fundraising, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble. And I did notice, Jay, there's one question in the Q&A. I don't know if we can tackle that.
Just popped up. Sure, absolutely.
And so the question here is, for fundraisers, would better focus be provided if perhaps the impact of facilitating gifts was a greater, more greatly weighted than dollars in the door? And my general approach to thanks for asking the question, is that it's all relationship management, and it's building better relationships and raising more money. And for most of our colleagues who have a portfolio, they're an instrumentality of their organization, period. They're not buddies with the donors. They're going to ebb and flow, right? Unfortunately, the retention rate of a lot of our colleagues isn't as long as we'd like. So the real key thing is when you're at that lunch, to listen, to be present, to record in a contact report that is amazingly detailed what you learned, because you may never learn again that particular prospect's grandson's name. But if you know that, and a year later you talk to them and say, "Hey, how's Jack doing?" It's going to spark something, because it's a real part of that relationship. So if you're just at that meeting thinking, "Oh, after this I have to file a contract," and you're not present, that lack of presence and that lack of detail orientation and listening, et cetera, will, I think, subvert the outcome. And so back to the original question, yes, I do think that I'm going to raise X amount of dollars this year is a little wrong-headed, because for the most part, it's at least a team effort to raise almost any big gift these days. And it also might get in the way of the longer term relationship management. Boy, I closed that $50,000 gift this year. Great for us. But the president was about to meet with that person and I didn't pay attention to the rules. Bad for us, right? So for lots of reasons, I think you might have better outcomes through focusing on the impact and the overall relationship management, rather than I'm getting credit for this $50,000. Thank you very much.
It's a great practical way to wrap up. Thank you very much for that question, and thank you both so much for all of this. And if you wouldn't mind, just before you fly, let us know how people can contact each of you. So, Chris, do you want to begin?
Sure. So you can reach me at cannon@zurigroup.com, CANNON. I'm also on LinkedIn as sort of buying professional network on a routine basis. Too often, I suspect, but I'd love to connect with anybody anytime.
Michael?
Yeah, LinkedIn as well. And I encourage you to check out the causativity.org website. You can contact me and others through there, or just email me at Yale.
Great. Thank you both again so much for this. Really do appreciate the conversation. Thanks for, introducing so much of this to me, and I'm sure to many others here. And everybody go out and get this book as soon as it's available for you. And in addition, I just want to encourage people, if you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you did, to join us for future conversations in the series. We have 90 programs like this year, some of which are audio only, and on our podcast series, but also conversations. And then finally, we also have a CFRE accredited webinar series. So if any of that appeals to you, just look over at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net. They are sponsoring all of this stuff. And so we are so grateful to them. And if you're interested in knowing more about your donors, I hope you'll take a look at DonorSearch for that as well. You can learn all about DonorSearch once again at donorsearch.net, as well as see all the upcoming programs. And you can even check them out on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Next week, in fact, we have another subject, which I'm sure will be of interest to anybody who pays any attention to the news, who follows that tech tug, because we're all exposed to so many minutes of the day. And that is, should fundraising be apolitical? Yes, I'll just let you sit on that question for a minute. Come join us for that conversation, and any others, we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, guys.